After The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild released 5 years ago today, people were left with a single question. What do open world games look like in a post Breath of the Wild landscape? Nintendo produced a game that felt so genre shaking and groundbreaking that other developers simply had to sit up and take notice. Everybody speculated about how the industry's most notable open world games might use Breath of the Wild as a springboard to push the boundaries even further. In the 5 years since Breath of the Wild released, the answer, however, has pretty consistently been, open world games still look an awful lot like they always did. There's a reason for that. Open world games are really hard and time intensive to make in the first place, even when following a pretty rigid formula. A game like Breath of the Wild, where the aim is to offer the player as much freedom to do what they like, in any order they like, any way they like, is even harder again to make. It was probably easier to take small elements of Breath of the Wild, like the paraglider in Horizon Forbidden West for example, than try to match Nintendo's behemoth of player choice. It's funny then, that just days before Breath of the Wild's 5th anniversary, the first game that truly felt like it was standing on that behemoth's shoulders released. Elden Ring takes the same basic template as Breath of the Wild, go anywhere, do anything, and used it to build their Soulsborne open world game. It has the same sense of unguided exploration, adventure, and discovery that made Zelda so good. It's also equally funny that just like Horizon Zero Dawn sat in the shadow of Breath of the Wild in 2017, Forbidden West sits in the shadow of Elden Ring in 2022. So, 5 years on, let's take a look at Breath of the Wild. What made it so special? What made it so hard to replicate? Why has it persisted in the gaming cultural conversation for so long? And why expectations for the sequel are so high? There are two things that work in tandem that make the minute-to-minute of Breath of the Wild so enjoyable. Movement and discovery. Breath of the Wild has a simple movement loop. Climb something very high, look around for a point of interest, and paraglide down to it. The entire world is built with verticality in mind. There is always a high point you can climb to close the gap between where you are and where you want to go. Climbing changes the game, quite literally. Climbing anything you like, and then gliding off it, is such an effective form of travel that it renders the poor horses in the game useless. Serves them right for mule kicking me. And even though the game does have a stamina system, you can usually brute force your way up any cliffside early in the game if you're persistent enough. But as the game progresses, you get more and more tools to climb further, faster. From stamina improvements, to clothes that let you scale waterfalls, to Revali's Gale. By the end of the game you'll wonder how you ever lived without them. Everything you do has that great sense of progression where every encounter or obstacle is challenging but doable early in the game, but becomes way easier later in the game. You can take down a Talus or Hinox at the beginning of the game if you're smart enough, but later in the game, you'll absolutely wreck it. This is extremely satisfying on both ends. It would be easy to make challenges like that insurmountable to wall off progress, but the game is designed so that you can legitimately do anything at any time. You can walk straight to Ganon from the moment you finish the tutorial. It's actually pretty easy. He has a very badly designed gate that you can simply walk around. You'll get absolutely destroyed by guardians, but it's possible. It's extremely gratifying to return to those guardians when you're stronger to ruin their lives. I am nothing if not petty and vengeful. Even late in the game, taking the straight path through Hyrule Castle to Ganon is incredibly tough. There are Lionel encounters that are tricky no matter how deep you are in the game, but you can simply walk around them. That's this game in a nutshell. It is the experience you want it to be. The developers filled this world with interesting things and challenges to discover, but rather than shine a big, gaudy spotlight on them and saying, look how cool the thing we did is, they're perfectly fine with you simply missing it. That displays the confidence they have in this as an experience. To bring things back to movement and discovery after that tangent, it is that ability to miss things that makes finding things so satisfying. I mentioned how the thing that ties the overall experience of both Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild together is unguided exploration. Neither game is a blank slate. Elden Ring gives you a rough direction to head in, while Breath of the Wild does give you main quest map markers, as well as plenty of breadcrumbs through NPCs and diaries that guide you in the right direction. But for the most part, you wander the world and find things. They don't do the open world cliche of dropping 200 icons on your map for you to trudge toward in an obligatory manner. When you find a shrine, or a giant horse, or a humongous maze, or a freaking dragon crossing the map, it feels like your discovery. That's the reason when this game first came out, there were so many stories about the things people found. Nobody that plays Breath of the Wild will have the exact same story. There will be shared experience, but never in the same order, never in the same way. That's the secret sauce. That's what makes this game so much fun to explore. Nothing feels like ticking a box, nothing feels like a stock open world activity purely because of how it's presented. They trust the player not to lose interest or get lost. They trust the game they designed enough to let it speak for itself. That is not an easy thing to do. The idea of unguided exploration sounds wonderful in theory, but you have to design the world so that the player doesn't feel overwhelmed. Dropping somebody in a vast open world with no clear indication of where to go could be confusing and disorientating. The freedom, however, to do all of the main story missions in any order makes getting lost basically impossible. If you keep wandering in a certain direction, you'll nearly certainly find a town. Equally, the world is designed to constantly present you with points of interest. The distinct orange of unfound towers and shrines catch the eye from any angle, but stand still at nearly any point on the map, and you'll see a forest, or a crumbling ruin, or an outpost, or a suspicious area that houses a Korok seed. They don't need to put an icon on the map for you to find any of these things. Your curiosity draws you toward them. It creates a spirit of exploration. You're a cartographer charting the world, rather than being led by the hand around it. Of course, it wouldn't be a particularly exciting world to explore if the things to find weren't interesting. The main reward for exploration is shrines. I love the shrines in this game so much. They serve the multi-purpose function of becoming your primary fast travel points, offering you the most useful reward in the game, a spirit orb, 4 of which can upgrade either your health or stamina, and they're just so much fun to complete in their own right. Every shrine is a little puzzle based around the mechanics in the game. Link has his rune skills, Cryonis can create ice blocks, Stasis freezes time, Remote Bombs are bombs, and Magnesis lets you move metal. These abilities are applied and reapplied in puzzle settings in these shrines to tremendous effect. Best of all, many of these shrines have multiple solutions, or you can use the flexibility of the mechanics to basically cheat. The most famous example is the shrine where you're meant to use the gyro controls to guide a ball through a maze, but you can simply flip the maze upside down instead. Of course, I still struggled despite cheating, but you can't win them all. There's a shrine where you're meant to use metal boxes to connect a current, but I simply dropped metal weapons on the ground to cheat. Some of the solutions may be intended, but they feel like cheating, and it makes solving the puzzle so satisfying. It's really where the mechanics of the game come to life. It shines a spotlight on just how great and flexible the physics systems in the game are. Finding a new shrine is a joy. You can get around the world faster, you get a step closer to a meaningful upgrade, and you get a delightful, tightly designed puzzle. The only disappointment is when you get a test of strength combat trial. Those are a bit of a bummer, but man, the shrines in this game are so good. The side quests are mostly standard open world fare. Go get a thing and bring it back, go find something in the world. But the Tarrytown side quest is exceptional. What starts from the simple interruption of the destruction of a house blossoms into a town full of people that grows before your very eyes as a community builds up, culminating in a beautiful wedding scene and a fully formed town. I'll take a handful of meaningful, memorable quest lines like that over a large number of forgettable filler quests any day. Hopefully that's the thing they're working on for the sequel. So many open world games are packed with filler, buckling under the weight of the bloat of content to pad out runtimes. Breath of the Wild is a little guilty of that too. While I don't think it's really intended for you to collect them all, and their little environmental puzzles are nifty, 900 Korok seeds is about 750 too many. A smaller quantity of memorable content will always trump a large amount of forgettable content. The other big difficulty in allowing players a greater degree of freedom is that it makes it inherently harder to tell a linear story, something most open world games are quite fond of doing. If you allow players to choose the order in which they go to Rito Village, Zora's Domain, Goron City, and Gerudo Town, you have to build a story that makes sense regardless of where people go first. Breath of the Wild does this about as elegantly as it could. It front-loads all the major story beats in the tutorial Great Plateau area, and then builds it out a little more in Kakariko Village, where the game points the player toward first. That means the majority of the world building is done by the time most players venture out into the open world proper. The rest of the storytelling is then either done environmentally or through flashbacks. There's a bunch of cool storytelling done solely through observing the world. For example, when walking through the field outside Fort Hateno, you see decommissioned guardians everywhere, all the way up to the gate, but then none behind the gate. The game does eventually show you exactly what happened there, but you know there was some sort of valiant last stand without the game including a single line of dialogue. If you scroll through the place names on the map, you'll see all sorts of allusions to areas from past Zelda games. There's so many examples throughout the world where you see Castletown ruins or Lon Lon Ranch ruins, where the game doesn't explicitly tell you what happens, but you know this is the destroyed former Hyrule, and it has many of the same landmarks of the Hyrules you've explored in the past. The memories scattered throughout the world fill out the rest of the backstory. Collecting them all gives you about 30 minutes of cutscenes that flesh out Zelda and the 4 champions. I like the depiction of Zelda in this game a lot. The crushing weight of the expectations of saving the world sits on her shoulders, and she feels like a more complete character even though you see very little of her in the present day. It's interesting to play a game where the majority of the interesting character development happens with characters who have been dead for a very long time. But I guess that comes with the territory when you make a game where the main character wakes up after 100 years. It's not exactly subtle. Urbosa literally spells out that Link is a reminder of Zelda's shortcomings, so she resents him. But it's cool to see a more adversarial relationship between Link and Zelda at first. The other champions don't get a ton of screen time, but they all leave an impression. Revali is cartoonishly arrogant, and I kinda love it. Urbosa is an all-time cool Zelda character. Mipha joins the entire world of Hyrule in being extremely horny for Link. Seriously, everybody. And Daruk is there too, I guess. All the Daruk stands are going to come for me. At the end of the day, this is a Zelda game. There's not much in the way of deep themes or thought-provoking characterization. It boils down to Ganon bad, go kill him. But when presented with the challenge of telling a non-linear story that helps accentuate player freedom, they did a pretty darn good job. Each segment of the game plays more or less the same. You arrive in a town, meet the main characters, who harken back to characters from 100 years prior, complete a mission, Link has a flashback, mount an assault to gain access to one of the 4 Divine Beasts, complete the Divine Beast dungeon, fight a boss, Thunderblight Ganon, by the way, still an absolute menace, and then move on to the next town. The quality of those segments vary. The flight range segment is painfully basic, while the Yiga clan stealth mission is pretty darn nifty, with a tremendous boss fight against Koga, especially for the secret banana horde. Those Yiga clan do love their bananas. All of the assault on Divine Beast segments are big and bombastic and don't overstay their welcome, and then there are the Divine Beast dungeons themselves. I'm of 2 minds about those bigger dungeons. I want an evolution of the old Zelda dungeon formula. The here's an item, now here's a few puzzles with that item formula did feel played out to me. I'm not entirely sure about the Divine Beasts though. They're more interesting conceptually than fun to play through. The big hook is that each dungeon has an element that you manipulate, be it turning cylinders in a central tunnel or raising and lowering the wings. So they're more spatial awareness puzzles than anything else. But a great deal of my success came from blind trial and error rather than looking at the options available to me and then having satisfying aha moments. The puzzle design in the shrines felt way more intuitive than the Divine Beasts did. I appreciate them trying something new with dungeons even if it didn't entirely work out, and would prefer them to keep experimenting with new dungeon ideas going forward rather than falling back on the old formula. So let's talk about breakable weapons. Breath of the Wild doesn't have any form of experience or leveling system. It doesn't have any kind of skill tree, you can only upgrade your armor, and it has very limited crafting in the form of cooking. Is cooking just crafting but with food? I like that. It removes a lot of the systems that feel like bloat to me in open world games. I get that a lot of people enjoy deep skill trees that allow plenty of customization. That's not for me. If I open a skill tree in a game and see like hundreds of options, it gives me anxiety. So in a game where you don't level up and you only learn a handful of new skills after defeating Divine Beasts, how do they balance the game? How do they make a game that offers lots of freedom, but without making combat encounters trivial because you ran straight to a late game weapon? The solution? The weapons break. I will listen to 2 arguments about breakable weapons. The weapons should be more durable, lasting longer, and there should be some kind of late game weapon that doesn't break. Some kind of Master Sword, perhaps. I will, however, always defend the weapons breaking for 3 reasons. The first, as already mentioned, is balance. The second being that weapons are frequently the reward for exploration, and if you just had the one cool sword that kills things, you'd have less need and reward to explore. And the last is that it makes combat encounters more fun. There is something exhilarating about the desperate scramble when your weapon breaks mid-fight and you have to suddenly pivot to a new strategy. It adds a layer of unpredictable excitement to combat. If you're fighting a late game Lionel, for example, you can't just use one weapon. It'll probably break, and you'll have to vary up your approach. Especially given the combat in the game isn't the deepest. Executing perfect dodges and flurry rushes is neat, but a lot of the game design is built around those weapons breaking. It would be a worse game if they didn't break. I will insist upon that to my grave. It is difficult to quantify in words, even though I literally just made a video trying to do so, but the thing that truly makes Breath of the Wild special is the game's vibe. The moment I fully clicked with this game was strolling for the first time into Rito Village at night as a wistful version of the Dragon Roost Island theme played, and in that moment, everything about the art design and music and world and characters just clicked into place. There is a beautiful solitude to Breath of the Wild. You spend so much of the game alone with the world, exploring nature with each step punctuated by the sparse notes of a piano. The art style is stunning and timeless, and more than makes up for the comparative lack of power under the hood, especially when you think about how this was built first and foremost to run on Wii U. The music doesn't have the same big, dynamic, memorable themes as previous Zelda games, but rather perfectly reflects the still, quiet experience that Breath of the Wild is. There is a commitment to the little details too, like when you kick a chest with your bare foot, Link winces in pain, or how bokoblins get mad when you steal its club, or how regular arrows become fire arrows in hot places. Those small touches make the world feel alive, and the feeling that anything could be around the next corner. The let me see what that one more thing is rabbit hole that keeps you exploring deeper and deeper into the map. As you stand atop a tower and look out into the distance, you can't help but be struck by the beauty of the world. It's going to be a difficult task, but all I want from the sequel is that same feeling of adventure. Breath of the Wild didn't completely overhaul the open world format. It still has towers you climb to reveal the map, and main missions, and side missions, and many other elements you see in every Ubisoft game. What it did do is refine those elements and strip out the excess. Is it more fun to explore and find things on your own, or is it more fun to be guided to them? Is it more fun to be led down a critical path, or is it more fun to chart your own path? Is it more fun to run up against arbitrary walls, or is it more fun to be able to scale those walls? There are 2 kinds of games. Games that try to say no to the player, and games that try to say yes. No, you can't go there yet. No, you can't climb that. No, you can't set that obstacle on fire. No, you can't do this mission unless you've done that one. Breath of the Wild is a game that tries, as best it can, to always say yes to the player. Everything about the climbing and physics systems and ruins and exploration and true openness lend Breath of the Wild a sense of freedom that few games can match. That's why it's been so hard to replicate, and that's why it's stuck in players' minds for the last 5 years. Thank you so much for watching. Breath of the Wild being 5 years old and Switch being 5 years old makes me feel very old. The more these anniversaries come along, the older I feel. Because I am, in fact, getting pretty old. If you like this video, hit a like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Follow me on Twitter @ArcadeNGA or ETTKIDNEY. On your left, my original review of Breath of the Wild. On your right, my retrospective review of Final Fantasy VII. Thanks for watching, and bye bye.